What is it like being a Jamaican in Tobago? Hi, I'm Xavier Murphy, the founder of Jamaicans.com. And today in Jamaicans to the World, I talk to Nicole Brown, a Jamaican who has lived in Tobago, the twin island of Trinidad and Tobago. Hi, Nicole, how are you?
Hi, Xavier. I'm really good. Thanks. Thanks for the interview.
Good, good. So, first up, which part of Jamaica are you from?
I am from Kingston, and I know everybody says that they're from Kingston. We know it's a greater corporate area, Kingston and St. Andrew, but technically it is St. Andrew, but we all know that everything in a certain jurisdiction is Kingston. So I grew up in Aylsham, that is near Cherry Gardens, Constant
Yeah.
Spring, Shortwood Road area.
All right. Which school are you representing?
Immaculate Conception High School.
All right, all right. So a big shout out to Immaculate. I think
Yes,
I've had quite a few Immaculate ladies on, so big up to Immaculate.
I'll
No,
be always. I have to pick up my class of 1998.
you don't want to tell them 1990. You know what? They're gonna guess your age.
That's okay. I don't mind. I have no issues sharing my age. Getting
All
older
right.
is a privilege.
Is there a teacher at Immaculate that inspired you that you'll always remember?
Yes, Mrs. Richards, because I was not strong in mathematics. I got good grades in it, but it came at a huge cost. And Mrs. Richards was the first teacher that really helped me to understand math and to build my confidence in math to the point where when I was doing CXC, she wasn't my teacher anymore, but I found her, I tracked her down, and I went to her extra lessons, and I thank God for her, and I got her too.
All right, big up to that. Big up to her. Mitch Richardson, you say?
Mrs. Richards,
Mrs. Richard.
Mrs. Doreen Richards.
All right, big up. Hopefully, she watches this or somebody prompts her so that you can see that she got a shout out today. No, tell us your story. I know you're between Trinidad, Tobago. You're in Tobago for quite a while. You go back and
Yeah.
forth. Tell us your story about how you got to Tobago. And let me also say this, folks. I know I did Trinidad and Tobago before, but Tobago is Tobago. Trinidad is Trinidad, and I'm understanding that. So
Yes.
tell us your story, and we'll dive into a little bit on the culture later on.
All right. Well, my story, how I ended up in Tobago, I actually have to tell you how I ended up in the country of Trinidad and Tobago. So I first came to Trinidad and Tobago as an exchange student as an undergrad in 2003, and I loved it. And so I decided to come back for my master's in about, I think it was 2004 to 2006. And then I left, I went to France, I taught English. And then I came back home and I was like, I need a real job. I need to look for jobs. And I was looking for jobs in Jamaica, but then I had to go back to Trinidad because I had left some things in storage after I finished my master. So I was like, let me go and get my stuff. And I was like, hey, let me also look for jobs here since I'm familiar with the country. And I dropped off my resume several places. And then one of my classmates from my master's, I did a degree in international relations, was like, the Tobago House of Assembly is looking for people. Why don't you send in an application? And I'd been very familiar with Trinidad because my dad studied in Trinidad. My of Trini friends, my dad studied in Trinidad. And I'd only ever been to Tobago on short trips for vacation, or we had a session in my undergrad where we had to go to Tobago and do some of our coursework. Not coursework, what do you call it? Yeah, coursework, like a not like a practicum kind of, practical study of the island of Tobago. And so I was like, sure, I was in my early 20s at the time, and I was like, okay, adventure. And so I sent in an application to the Tobago House of Assembly Department of Youth Affairs, and I got back a positive response. And so January of 2008, I packed up all of my belongings I could hold in 2 suitcases. I boarded a flight to Trinidad, and I stayed with a friend's parents. And this is a Trini friend I met in France.
Okay.
And her mom was like, I'm not sending you across to Tobago unless you can tell me who is picking you up at the airport, where you're going to stay and some basic information. I was just like, I got a job, I'm going. I didn't ask any questions. And then when she found out the information and I called the person who I was in touch with and she was satisfied, then she allowed me to go on the domestic air bridge, which is the plane between Trinidad and Tobago, and I landed in Tobago in January of 2008, and I didn't leave until January of 2016 when I relocated back to Trinidad.
All right. So tell us a little bit about Tobago and Trinidad and the differences, because I've heard, again, when I did Trinidad and Tobago, some people are like, listen, understand that it's almost, a different culture. And I've heard some people say, well, Tobago is more, think of Jamaica country and
rural Jamaica. Again, you have to be careful now, because I went to Ocherius the other day and I made the mistake of saying, oh wow, me with my bossy Kingston self made some comments about rural, and they looked at me like, this is not country. And I so I will be careful.
I'm not going to compare. I just hear that not more natural.
But it's more like what I would consider the more north coast of Jamaica, the more tourist areas like your Ocherius, Negril, but not as not as big, obviously. Okay. But definitely in terms of beauty, Tobago is absolutely gorgeous. It's very similar to Jamaica in that regard, but it's in a more condensed space. So you can see more of what they have to offer in a shorter space of time.
Okay. And the cultures, would you say from a cultural perspective, and I don't want to compare people, just tell us about the culture in Tobago.
Okay, so
compare it.
Okay, so Tobago culture actually was more similar to Jamaican culture for me than Trinidad culture in some ways, in that most people would know that in terms of the racial demographics in Trinidad, it's about 40% African descent, 40% Indian descent, and 20% other. And so that has a bearing on the culture and the food, whereas Tobago is more like Jamaica in 90% African descent culture. So Tobago culture is a little bit more homogeneous than Trinidad culture. Also, there's not as much religious diversity in Tobago as in Trinidad.
Okay.
So it's not that you don't have the other religions in Tobago. It's not that you don't have the other races in Tobago. It's just that it's not as prevalent, at least at the time that I was living there. I know that things change over time as.
Right. So tell us about the people. What are they like?
I found Tobago, they're very proud people, and I think that that's the similarity between Jamaica and Tobago. They're very much proud of being Tobagonian. They're very proud of their culture. Their culture, I think, is very strong. And again, this is not to say that Trinidad culture is not strong. Trinidad culture is also strong, but it's different because there are so many different cultures in Trinidad. So in Tobago, for example, they have harvest, and that is a time where each village will have a big cook-up where anybody can just come. So if, say, Bell Garden is having harvest, that's one of the villages in the more rural side of Tobago, then you don't have to know the people. You could just go in people's house and eat food. And that was very shocking to me.
Oh.
And you'll get like the crab and dumpling, and their dumplings are different from ours. Their dumplings are flat. It's pretty much the same recipe,
right?
But they're much flatter and thinner than ours. And I love their cassava dumplings. So they use cassava flour to make the dumplings, and cornmeal dumplings. They have more varieties of dumplings than we do. And, with different stewed meats. So you stew pork, stew chicken. I didn't get adventurous with the wild meat. Wild meat is very popular in both Trinidad and Tobago. That's things like your manikou, your goatee, your iguana, those kinds of things.
Okay.
I wasn't adventurous.
I was going to the iguana because I'm I'm interested. I would try the iguana.
I'm not adventurous. I this is how unadventurous I am. When I visited Japan and I know everybody's gonna come for me, I did not try sushi in Japan.
Okay,
When
nothing
I
wrong
went to
with that.
Japan, and I like sushi.
I tried sushi once,
Yeah.
and that was it for me. I'll
No, I
try
like
something
sushi,
more.
but when I went to Japan, I was just there for 2 days. I wasn't risking anything. And I was just like, I have to be on a plane today and do what I have to do and then be on another plane tomorrow. I wasn't gonna mess with it. So unfortunately, I didn't get the full experience. And so I tend to veer towards foods that I'm familiar with. Even in yeah, even though I consider myself an adventurous person, I'm not that adventurous with food.
All right, I hear you. So tell us what happened when you tell people I'm from Jamaica. What's the typical response like, and what's the
Generally, it's positive for the most part. People want to know a lot of they have a lot of questions. There's a lot of admiration for Jamaica, I would say, in this part of the world. Despite what you might say, when we had those little tensions, it's just like sibling rivalry as far as I'm concerned. And um a lot of people are confused though, because I don't think they fully understand that just like their country, we have different accents. So I get but you don't really sound Jamaican. And I'm just like, well, first of all, I'm speaking standard English. I'm not going to come and speak patois with you. And also, not everybody is going to sound like a dancehall artist. And the dancehall music is very popular
I was
actually
about to go there.
across the Caribbean. So they kind of expect it to sound more like that. So there's some, it actually depends on what the person's exposure to Jamaica is. So for the people who went to UE or visited Jamaica regularly, they pick up my accent really, really quickly. For
Right.
people who may know of Jamaica through pop culture, they would say, okay, where are you from? And they would go, Guyana, Grenada, St. Vincent. And then every time they'd go, I would just be like, go up a little bit more. And then eventually they'd settle on Jamaica. And then there'd be debates amongst themselves, like, no, she don't sound Jamaican. And then somebody's like, yes, man, she sounds Jamaican. And it depends on their exposure to Jamaica and Jamaicans.
Okay, all right. Food. You touched on it a little bit, and there's always a sibling rivalry. Is it the best food is in Trinidad and Tobago? The best food is in Jamaica. Again, Tobago has a different culture.
Yes.
I'm understanding from Trinidad, Twin Island, but different.
Yes.
What would be the food? And again, I'm not doing a comparison. If there's a food that you would say, Xavier, if you visit Tobago, you have to try this, what would that be?
Or I will give you the typical response and then I will give you my response. So the typical response is, if you go to Tobago, you have to try crab and dumpling. But as I said earlier, I am not adventurous. So I didn't try the crab and dumpling. I think I've tried it maybe once, and I tried the bougie version of it that was like the one out of the shell. So y'all, please don't come for me in the comments. But what I like is what they call the blue food. So they eat a lot of dasheen.
Okay.
And they have a whole festival called Blue Food Festival. Like how we have the Yam Festival in Jamaica?
Mm-hmm.
Blue Food Festival, you can get everything made out of dasheen ice cream, dasheen wine, dasheen everything. But they have dumpling and provision with some kind of stewed meat is standard fare in Tobago. Any major event you go to, that would be on the harvest. And I like how they make their stewed meats. I don't know what they do differently from us, but I love it. And they use a lot of bay leaf in their seasoning.
Okay.
So I don't know if that is what gives it the flavor. Tobagonians, you could tell me what brings the magic. What brings the magic?
Tell us, Tobagonians, tell us your Tobagonians.
Yes.
Sorry.
And then if you're saying like Trinidad and Tobago national, you would say Trinbagonian.
Oh.
So that in the common parlance. So if they're representing Trinidad and Tobago, they would more likely say they're Trinbagonian. And if they're specifically from Tobago, they say they're Tobagonian.
Okay. All right. Nice. I learned something new.
Yes.
So So if there was, you said, the place in terms of weight setup, you can get to, you know, quite a few places,
Yeah,
in terms
and
of
I've done that. I've driven around the island, and it took out. You could do it in a day.
okay.
If you're not making very long stops in different places, but I've done that trip I think once or twice.
Mm.
And it's
It-
absolutely gorgeous. And they have all of the different things. They have the mountains. They have the rainforest.
and that's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah,
If
they
there
have the
was
beaches.
if there was maybe give us two places that you'd say if you're going to Tobago, um, make sure you see these two places.
Okay, all right. So Pigeon Point Beach for me is my favorite beach. That's kind of what they use to add view from Pigeon Point Beach. And I'll try and set when I'm sending you my pictures, I'll try and get some pictures of that there. And then now the amazing thing is the Buku Reef. So they have these glass bottom boats that go out to this area called Buku Reef. And in the middle of the deep water, there's a place called the Nylon Pool, which is shallow water in the middle. So you go way out into the ocean, and
Wow.
then the big boat will anchor, and you get off, and it's shallow, like up to above my belly button. And you can,
Wow.
yeah, it's fascinating. And the legend has it. Okay, let's see if I can remember. And again, you can correct me in the comments. Is that if you dip in the nylon pool, there's something about that. You'll reverse your age. You look younger. And
Maybe you dipped in there.
there's two legends about the nylon pool, and I can't remember them right now. When I was living there, I used to know these things like quick.
All right.
It's been a while.
Someone would tell us what the legend is and what's the story behind it.
Yes.
Cost of living. What's the cost of living like in Tobago?
It's higher than Trinidad from what I remember.
Mhm.
Trinidad and Tobago on a whole much lower than Jamaica. But Tobago is a little bit higher because of I think, and people could correct me if I'm wrong, but because a lot of the goods have to be transported to Tobago from Trinidad,
Okay.
there's that extra cost. So it would either come, most of the goods come on the ferry. So you have the cargo ferry, and then you have the passenger ferry. And again, I was living there
Right.
I left 7 years ago, but
Right.
but I remember I have like a friend who works at a grocery store, and sometimes I'd go with him to go on the boat to help offload goods sometimes. And
Oh, wait.
yeah, so
What do you call it?
it's interesting. I think that's one of the interesting things about living in Tobago is that you're so dependent on the transport. Like if the transport is not working between Trinidad and Tobago, or when the boat goes on that dry dock. I remember when the boat used to go on dry dock, you know that certain things would take a little bit longer to be replenished and that kind of stuff. But it's interesting. And then they have regular flights between Trinidad and Tobago, and it's about 20 minutes on the plane. And the boat is about 2.5 hours on the boat, and it's one of those ferries that you could drive your car on.
Okay.
So it's really cool. Yeah.
It sounds so you becoming a ship hand or unloading. It almost sound like there's a close knit community.
Oh yeah, no, yes, definitely. Tobago, no, that's one of the things that I would say was the blessing, but also it's hard. It's a very community oriented society, and very family oriented. So when I got there, they want to know, okay, Brown. They want to know which Browns from this name. And I was like, oh, Jamaica. And they're like, oh, okay. They want to identify you by who are your parents. Like it's not just, okay, where are you from or where your address is. It's who are your parents, who are your grandparents. And that close-knit culture, it was hard for me to get in because I didn't have any family ties there. I didn't have any history there. Like I said, I got a job. I came on the plane and I just landed there. But the interesting thing is, by the time I left, I was so in that they didn't want me to leave. They're like, why are you leaving us? Why are you going across to Trinidad? And if you had told me that 8 years earlier that that's the reaction I would have gotten, I'd have been like, no. But it's like, yeah, they give you that you have to prove yourself.
Okay.
That was my experience, at least. You have to prove yourself. You have to show that you have their best interest at heart. and I don't blame them
Right.
either,
Right.
because they're kind of like seen as the little sister for Trinidad. And so living in Tobago, I got a whole different experience, because I was working for the Tobago House of Assembly, Department of Youth Affairs. And sometimes I'd have to go across to Trinidad for work-related events. And at times, people, they didn't know much about Tobago. They assumed that the Tobago House of Assembly was this one building that everybody worked in. And I was like, no, just like how you have ministries and each ministry is in a different building. It's not just the Tobago House of Assembly and you go there and there's just this one building. So I was like, no, I'm from the Department of Youth Affairs. We have our own budget. We have our own secretary or assistant secretary or our own administrator, and so I got to understand why, I saw certain things, because when I was representing Tobago or the Tobago House of Assembly, there was this kind of, people looking at you strange, or, similar to like when we as Caribbean people go to America, how sometimes they have these questions about where we live and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so I, working with young people, I was able to really get involved in the society and understand how it worked. And once I did that, I was good. They just want to know
So like
for them.
You were like almost an ambassador. Once you went back over to the island of Trinidad, you were basically explaining, hey.
And anytime I'm in Trinidad and I see my people from Tobago, I get really excited, because the population is approximately 60,000 people. And so almost everybody is related in some way, shape, or form. There's usually
everybody in everybody's business.
It's a few degrees of separation between others. And so it's kind of like there is a kind of family atmosphere. There is a village, their identities, your community, which village are you from, that kind of stuff. They have their heritage festival, which is really interesting. So just think about our John Canoe.
Right.
It's on a much bigger scale.
Wow.
And so each village has their specialty. And again, sorry, I've been away for so long, I can't remember each village's specialty. But then you'll go, oh gosh, there was Mariah wedding, right? So the Mariah, and if I'm wrong, sorry guys, the Tobago wedding, and then there's the Tobago jig, and they have all of their dances, and they're really good at preserving their unique
culture.
Culture.
Nice. All right, so let me ask you a scenario. Throwing this scenario out here. You're between these two islands still. When you head to Jamaica,
yes,
and you get off the plane, what's that one thing that you're doing?
I am thanking God. Well, when the plane lands, I am from the old school. Again, when we used to clap, when everybody used to clap when the plane lands. From Air Jamaica days, I still clap. And I thank God that I've reached my home. As I say to everybody, I've lived abroad for more than I've lived in Jamaica, but no matter where I roam, Jamaica is my home.
All right. So is there a food? Is there a place you're headed to? You're making sure that...
Oh, in Jamaica, my parents' house. That's the number one. And then, outside of my parents' house,
food. What's the food? Are you saying the same food is? Are you saying you just get the same thing there in Trinidad and Tobago? Are you in? What is that you're craving once you land?
The good thing about living in Trinidad and Tobago is that there's no shortage of Jamaicans and there's no shortage of Jamaican food. Now, earlier in my stint here, I used to bring patties with me, juicy or tasty in the box. But now you can get juicy patties, you can get tasty patties. You have people selling jerk, you can get ackee and saltfish. And so I didn't really have that deficit like I did when I was living in the States or in Europe, because you can get a lot of Jamaican products here. There is the Jamaican community isn't as extensive in Tobago as in Trinidad. However, it's still present. And so I don't have that feeling like when I used to get off the plane and I was coming from the US or other places, where I had to go and get X, Y, and Z.
I hear you. Yeah. So I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot. You don't have to answer this one.
Okay.
But I hear that the Kentucky in Trinidad and Tobago is on par with the Kentucky in Jamaica?
This
You don't
is
have
going.
to answer. You don't have to.
Well, I'm going to answer, but I know that Andrew Holness might revoke my citizenship if he has that power. But I prefer the KFC in Trinidad and Tobago.
Whoa! Don't say.
And I have several friends who are going to come for me, but their spicy is next level.
Okay. All right.
And the only thing is they don't have barbecue. So that's where I would give Jamaica the edge. But overall, the yes. So
Okay, leave it alone. Stop now.
please don't revoke my citizenship.
You redeem yourself with the barbecue. Stop right here, so we'll stop right here. So, you mentioned in terms of the diversity of people and so on the on Tobago. Do you have other islands that are close by Tobago that are constantly in between, apart from Trinidad?
Not as I mean, it's relatively close to Grenada in terms of geographic wise. So like exchange program to Grenada, but that is one thing with the whole Trinidad and Tobago. I feel like they're more connected to the other Caribbean islands than we are in Jamaica. And I think that that's a great thing. So you'll find a lot more people who say, okay, my father is from Grenada, my mother is Trinidadian, my mother is Trinidadian, my dad is from St. Kitts. So you'll see a lot more of that here than in Jamaica. And I think that's actually I find it's a good thing for Caribbean unity. That's part of those unity in Trinidad and not Jamaica. Was that my parents always spoke highly about their UE experience, and I wanted that. I've lived in the States, I've lived in Europe, but I really wanted that Caribbean experience, and I was fascinated by Sam Selvon, and it's Michael Anthony, who passed recently, and the books that I read in English literature class and learning about geography. And I just wanted to see it for myself, and I don't regret it.
I remember, I'm trying to remember the lane, Miguel Lane or
Miguel Street, yes,
Miguel
that's
Street.
another one. And you know what I think I want to do now? I want to reread those books having lived here. That's something I want to do.
Yeah, that was a good one. I never forget Miguel Street, one of my favorite books. Yes. So listen, Nicole, thank you for telling us about your story, your journey to Tobago. And I know you're in Trinidad now, but I know you have a special place in your heart.
I do, and it was a pleasant surprise. It was really a pleasant surprise because I had intended to just go and get 1 year work experience, and I got 8.
So they say Smalley, and they have other names. Now, what do and let me make sure I say it right. Tobagoans?
Tobagonians.
Say it again.
Tobagonians.
Tobagonians.
Yes.
How do Tobagonians say goodbye, or if they're greeting you, and saying to catch you, Jamaicans catch you later? Do you remember, or
I can't remember anything specific. No, sorry.
All right. So listen, folks. If you know, please put it in the comments so we know how they say, you typically greet goodbye.
Yeah,
no, we will do the typical Jamaican one day. And that is, Nicole, me catch you later.
All right, then. Lovely talking to you, Xavier.
And thank you again. All the best.
All right. Bye.
Show some love now. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell. That way you don't miss a video.